And happy Friday, Xavier fans. This is another one of your Razorcasts. Jeff Zink and Jim Reeker on the cutting edge of Xavier Musketeer basketball. Going a little later this week because our good buddy Jim actually went up to Wisconsin yesterday to see the Muskies play and got together with one of his boys. So, Jim, welcome back.
Yeah, it was a good time last night. Madison was a hopping, buzzing place. First of all, you had the game with the Musketeers at the Kohl Center. Today they had all the Wisconsin State Championships being played at Camp Randall, and tomorrow they have Michigan coming in for a big football game there and game day for ESPN's there. So the town was totally buzzing last night. Hello? Hello? I seem to have lost Jeff. Hopefully he will be back soon. Jeff!
Still at it, Jim? I cut myself off there.
All right. I think the fans are still with us. I was.
Yeah. Oh, they want to listen to you. They want to listen to me anyway. I figured you had a little bit more to say. Yeah.
Well, I was talking about that they got the big football game up there tomorrow. Yeah. Actually, they had the state championships being played at Camp Randall today, so that place was just a sports mecca and will be all weekend. And actually, ESPN Game Day is going to be broadcast from there, so those people were excited that the town was hopping for sports. So we started off with a big win over the Badgers.
And we'll get to that in just a little bit as Xavier started their season, and you're on. That is one of the most beautiful campuses in the country. If you're a devotee of visiting college campuses and walk around, you can't get them much prettier than Wisconsin. But let's go back a little bit. When we talked last week, the season hadn't even started, and Xavier got off to a very quick start, which is great, including that Wisconsin win. They're sitting at 3-0. Let's go back first to the Moorhead State game, which really wasn't much of a challenge. They won it 101-49, but the question mark for that was the health of Trevon Blewett, and it seemed like that right shoulder didn't hamper him at all.
Yeah, that was a big concern because he had not played. They actually had a closed-door scrimmage with the Ohio State Buckeyes. He didn't play in that. And then they had a exhibition game against Thomas More, which I went to, and he did not even take his warm-up off. And, again, there had been rumors that he had torn a rotator cuff, but then sources were saying that, no, it wasn't that serious, but you just wonder what the truth was. But, yeah, he came out firing, actually hit 5 from 7 from three-point range and led the Muskies with 25 points that night. We didn't get to see that game live because, remember, Jeff, we were doing a high school football game that night, but I did watch a replay on YouTube, and they looked very, very good. They hit the ground running. And, and Moorhead was, an opponent you're going to play early on. They had a lot of new players, and so, we didn't really expect much of a challenge from them, as often happens with a lot of these early season games. But one statistic that stood out to me, and we talked about Trevon, was that the Musketeers had 36 baskets, 26 assists. Now that's just good team play. Yeah, and I think that's going to maybe be the hallmark of this game, and we'll get through the other games, but they seem to play together very, very well. They got a lot of talented players, and with the 3 new young players who are, 2 of them at least last night were playing vital minutes for them. So, very optimistic. This is going to be an exciting team, I think. I'm very, very optimistic. Look forward to seeing them out in the desert next week.
Yeah, and that's something that will come up in what's coming up next. But, yeah, that was one of the question marks we had last week was how would the new talent mesh with a group that was pretty much coming back without much of a loss from that Elite 8 squad from last year. Probably the only real excitement of that game, I don't know if you were aware of this or not, or you probably heard it on the replay, was that Preston Spradlin, the coach of Moorhead State, had an assistant with a cell phone in his hand the whole game because his wife was expecting their second child, and he was ready to leave the court if she called and said she was going into labor. And I think the only people
I did read about that, so that was exciting. I don't know if she's had it by now. I think her due date, she was a little bit past it at that point. So
I couldn't find that information.
Family first always.
Yeah. Well, it seems like the only people that went into labor that night were Morehead State, and they, getting beat by 52. It's not a pretty thing. Then we went on to Ryder, another one of those teams that I think even you said last week, Jim, where's Ryder? And I'm sure a lot of Muskie fans were saying, where's Ryder? Who's Ryder? Isn't Ryder a boy's name? But it's a nice little school, but they're not up to the caliber of the Musketeers. But they were able to score 75, even though the Muskies cracked triple digits again. But it also looked like they were working through some things, because some pretty balanced scoring again in that game.
Yeah, a lot of balanced scoring, and I did go to that game, and if you look at the score, you think, okay, this game wasn't close, but Xavier had about a 19-point lead in the first half, really got off to a strong start, but Ryder brought it back down to 10 by halftime, and Ryder actually scored the first 5 points in the second half, so the margin was down to 5 points at about the 18-minute mark in the second half. So it was, but then it was like wake-up time for the Musketeers, and they got themselves in gear and edged the lead back out and won easily. But again, it was a little bit closer there in the second half than you may have thought if you hadn't seen the game. But, yeah, balanced scoring, blew it, put in 26. He was 5 from 11 from three-point. Jones, and he should, against a team that I think their tallest man was maybe 6'7". He had 19 points with 8 rebounds, and he's really looking good this year, everything that we thought he would be. Here's the thing that you talked about so much last year, and they never got it fixed. And actually, I looked. First game, they were 63% from the free throw line, which, again, that's okay, maybe acceptable, but we'd like to see it a little bit higher. But against Ryder, they were 82% on free throws. So that was a positive out of that game. The one negative, and it was a negative last year, and it was it's still been a negative, something they really need to work on, is the turnovers. They actually had 11 turnovers in that game, but they had 8 in the first half, so they did play a little bit better in the second half in that game. But, yeah, and so the fans understand this game against Ryder and then the game coming up on Monday against Hampton, those are actually part of that Las Vegas tournament. Although they will not play, there's actually 2 brackets of 4 teams, and those 2 teams are in the other bracket. But the way the rules are written, they can call that part of that tournament. And so the 2 games, Ryder and Hampton, and the 2 they'll play out in the desert next week, those 4 games only count as 1 game on their schedule. That's why the Musketeers did that, and that's a good thing because it allows them to get more experience in the regular season.
Meyer Lansky and the mob didn't have such creative financing as they can with moving these games. I guess the one question mark there, and you probably saw it last night, I didn't get a chance to delve too deep into the Wisconsin game, was Nigel Marshall was sort of limited. They're saying he's having some back problems. Was he able to bounce back and be okay there?
He played last night. He didn't score a lot. I did notice right before the second half that he came over and had the trainer loosen that back up, had him laying on the floor and doing some exercises. So I think he's still dealing with it. He looked really good in the preseason in the scrimmage against Thomas More. But, yeah, he did play some vital minutes last night. Didn't score a whole lot. I think he maybe had a point or 2. I think he had 1 point. He went 1 for 2 from the foul line. But he was out there playing some vital minutes against a high-level opponent. So I think he's still dealing with it, but it's not keeping him on the bench.
Yeah, I'll say, if anybody knows about bouncing around on the hardwood, it's a basketball player. It beats up on your back, beats up on your joint to shorten the career of the great Larry Bird and a few other people, and I just hope that Nigel was able to work through that. And, of course, a nice thing about the Ryder game, I don't know if you saw him or not, but they were touting the fact that Edmund Summer came back to see his former mates. Edmund's still rehabbing that knee injury. He is a member of the Indiana Pacers, hasn't played for them yet, but came back to say hi to the boys and push them on to victory.
Yeah, no, we mentioned before, Edmund decided not to come back and to go into the NBA, but here's the reality. He probably may not even have been ready for any of this season for the Musketeers either anyway. So, but we wish him luck in his NBA career. I think he will one day make the big squad, and we'll see him on on the big floor.
Well, he is listed on the roster, so the Pacers are protecting him until they can come back and see what he can play, and he might be one of the sleepers of last year's draft. And that brings us to last night. Going to the Badgers, I play them at home. It's really our first challenge of the new season. Wisconsin not ranked this year. They've lost some people. They went to the Final Four a couple years ago, and part of it, I'm sure you'll talk about that heartbreaker and the revenge factor there. But still a formidable test on the road. When you go to Madison, it's not easy. And even though the score was tied at halftime, the Muskies pull away for a 10-point victory.
Yeah, it was what an environment. The place, the Kohl Center, I think seats close to 18,000, and most of the seats were full. And I could tell you, as you know, I've traveled a lot. I've seen the Musketeers play in a lot of different venues. I've never felt so lonely as a Musketeer fan than I did last night. There was no blue in that place at all. If there were 100 Xavier fans in that arena last night, I would be surprised. Didn't travel well. Of course, it's a Thursday night, and it's a week before Thanksgiving when, people aren't probably as privileged as I to travel when they feel like it. But again, I had to watch my P's and Q's because the enemy was amongst us, but it was their home. So
they weren't amongst us. You were amongst them.
There you go. And it was loud, and again, and I don't know if you watched the game, if you could pick it up on TV, but that game 2 years ago was on both teams' minds. When the Musketeers came out, the student section started chanting "Sweet 16, Sweet 16."
Ooh.
I saw shirts. There were shirts with. Do you remember the famous picture of Bill Murray at the end of that game, kind of a befuddled look on his face?
Oh God, yeah.
They had shirts with that picture on it that said "Sweet 16." So they started to, they got into. I think they're trying to get it ahead of the Musketeers. Of course, and then I'll talk about the end of the game after we review what happened during the game. I don't know how much you saw that, what happened at the end of the game. Some questions, and, of course, I was listening to Wisconsin talk radio this morning, and two different ways to go about what actually happened and what was appropriate. So we'll talk about that. But let's talk about the game. What a game. What a game. Blew it again off to a slow start. He only had 4 points in the first half, and I think all four of those might have been free throws, but he ended up in the second half heating up. J.P. McCura, of course, kind of kept him afloat in the first half, but you have Gates, Kaiser Gates. He has finally become what I think they thought he would be 2 years ago. I think part of that is he's healthy. He had 3 big three-pointers, added 11 points. Tyreek Jones had 11 points. Now, he got schooled a little bit by Ethan Happ. They're got to be close to an All-American. He's a player at 7 foot and very, very mobile. And Sean O'Mara, who, of course, has drawn the ire of Coach Mack all year long and not playing up to his potential, he chipped in 8 points, but also played some excellent defense, made some tough shots for Ethan Happ, because Ethan Happ kind of took Tyreek Jones to school a couple times down low. So it was good to see Sean, and I think Sean likes to play against bigger, more physical players. When he plays against some of these smaller players, number one, he gets called for a lot of fouls because he's just so much bigger and stronger, and it's noted when he, runs into him or pushes him to the floor, whereas he's playing against some of these big physical players from the Big Ten. That doesn't happen as much. So, but what a game. What did you see? What was your takeaway?
Well, there's a couple things. I think it's great. I think Coach Mack's going to be on, Sean. He's a key psychologist. He knows who to push and who to pull and who to leave alone, and they were expecting big things out of him this year to step up. You used to try to call him the three-headed monster last year. You never knew who was going to show up in what game, and he was part of that. So I think as the year goes on, Chris Mack's going to be able to mold that clay into the statue that they want. The big thing, a couple big things, and they're a bit of a question mark. Of course, it's early in the year, and not big things, because Wisconsin is not the team that it was even last year, a couple of years, they lost Nigel Hayes, who was, the quote machine from their Final Four team. Or Frank Kaminsky's been gone for a while. Happ is the big star, but he doesn't have a lot supporting him. So it might be a long year for Coach Gard and the Badgers. It's not the Bo Ryan-led team that went to the Final Four a few years ago. Xavier got off hot. They hit 6 of their 7 shots to start, but they still ended up tied at halftime. So they're still working out the rotation. Probably the biggest thing that stood out to me in looking at it is, you mentioned about how Trevon started off slow and heated up and still got 20, but he was also the leader in rebounds. And you've got to wonder with the people that we have there, and you've already mentioned that they're going to be bigger and stronger and taller and tougher in the Big Ten, but still, when Trevon's leading in rebounds, that throws up a bit of a flag to me.
Well, Trayvon's a great rebounder. He just understands the game. He understands position. And I think if you go back, you'd be surprised that he usually is near the top in rebounding. And the thing, if you look at, and I actually watched the Fox Sports show afterwards, they were talking about, and the thing that you notice if you haven't seen the Musketeers live is Mikura really is one case. You just notice how much bulk he has put on. And Trayvon's the same thing. He's very strong. They were talking about on the Fox show about the weight program that Xavier obviously has, and actually we're asking Chris Mack about his weight coach, and actually was a football player at North Carolina that he brought him along from his days. Got to know him down at Wake when he was down there with Skip Prosser, and he brought I can't even remember his name with him, and he says, he does a great job of getting those guys in the weight room in the off season and putting on some mass. And it was Big Ten, Big East basketball last night. There was a lot of pushing and shoving going on, and but I wouldn't be too concerned about that. I think Sean O'Mara only did have 2 rebounds. I'm not quite sure what Tariq had. I know that Mikura had 8 and Blewett had 9. So
I'm not knocking on Trevon when I say that or the other. It's just when you're shooting guard and your top scorer is also, this isn't Oscar Robertson pulling a triple double, and you've got that front line. You just hope that builds. Yeah, Trevon is a very sneaky rebounder. He knows how to cut his angles and do with that. But let's go ahead and talk about the end of the game that you brought up and get your thoughts on that.
Well, it was again the chanting, and then there's a question: was the alley-oop dunk appropriate at that point with the score where it was? There was some people said it wasn't appropriate. They should have pulled the ball out, just take a time, but it was an 8-point lead, I think, at that time. I think J.P. Mikura, again, some people don't like him. He's a guy, I remember last year, I was talking to a Villanova fan when I was down in Florida, and I think he put it exactly the way it is. J.P.'s one of those players, if he's on your team, you love him. If he's not on your team, you hate him. And he does, I know he talks a lot. You can tell he talks a lot because a lot of times you'll see other players push him or, say something back to him. So, that was kind of his, I think, because if I watch the replay, he's signaling it all the way down the floor. I can't remember who threw it. I think it was maybe Quentin that threw it to him. But you see him signal it when he's coming down the left side of the floor that he wants it. And Quentin put it right where, it was beautiful, that exclamation mark. So I don't think that was too out of line. Of course, and I give JP credit. I didn't even remember this, that he, being a student of the game in the NCAA, knew that Florida had beaten the Badgers last year to put them out of the NCAA tournament on a last-second shot. Because after he did that, they started the Sweet 16 chant again. And actually, there were some other chants that I can't even tell you what they were. They were a little inappropriate. Of course, we know
not quite family friendly. Is that what you're saying?
No. So, but he turned around when they took him out of the game, and he walked right down, almost in front of them, and started the gator chop. And again, I was like, what does that mean? I didn't realize till later, but obviously the students from the Badgers, because they started on him. I give Chris Mack credit because he actually grabbed him right away and basically told him to sit down.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you saw this too. When Trayvon was taken out of the game, he walked down and obviously couldn't hear but he was saying something to them. So the two of them, obviously they were hurt a lot 2 years ago when they lost that game. In fact, Chris Mack had said that was the toughest loss he had ever experienced or seen a team experience in all of his years of coaching. So that was on their mind, revenge, and of course they brought it up. So I don't know what you saw. Again, there was a Twitter. I don't even know the guy, Steve Stricker, a golfer.
Yeah. So Steve Stricker, very good golfer.
He, I guess, was tweeting a bunch of things at the Xavier, at Chris Mack, that your kids have no class, blah blah blah. So
that's not like Steve Stricker.
So it was fun.
Yeah, it's college athletics, Jim. It's
you gotta have a little bit of fun.
And like you said, if they're going to break out T-shirts with Bill Murray's face on it when his son's on the bench and say Sweet 16 and taunt you from the beginning, you got to be able to take a gator chop. Now, you also wish the kids would be above that, but we are still talking basically about kids, 18, 19, 20-year-olds.
Exactly.
And they get fired up in that, and you're talking about guys, and the testosterone level goes up, and like you said, it's 18,000 strong, and it's a sea of red. So now, this time of year, I don't really have a problem with that. Losing your cool in March and getting that taunting, unless you really know you can get somebody's head, that's a different story. But, hey, it's the third game of the year. Have a little fun with it as long as you're not – and you hope that they're smiling about it. That's one of the things is people kind of lose their sense of humor about these things. And suddenly it becomes a taunting thing, and you get Steve Stricker. That surprised me. I didn't see that. Steve was the captain of last year's President's Cup, representing the country around the world with the golf team, and he's always been a class act, very quiet guy, but he is from up in that area. So you just hope that it's like those things you do with your buddies where you got stupid nicknames for them that get under their skins, but you're still smiling and jabbing each other and having fun later. It doesn't turn the next thing. But it's a great win for the Muskies. That's their first non-conference win since December of 2015, December 22nd. Last year they didn't have any non-conference wins on the road. I should say first non-conference road win. So that's a good one to get under their belt early and against a very tough opponent in a very tough venue. Well, let's talk a little bit about what's coming up then. Like he already mentioned, we have Hampton on Monday, and this, we go back to Ryder, and this shouldn't be an issue. But knowing that the guys are headed to the desert and all that, I can't see him stumbling against Hampton, but you just don't want to see him getting caught forward. Anything we should look about on Monday?
Well, just to add to that, if they read or do any of their research, which obviously J.P. McCura does, the Hampton Pirates have already lost to Ryder by 15 points this year. Yeah. So if they see that, here's the thing, mature team. And again, one last comment about, as we wrap up last night, very hostile environment. Losing a major lead twice, but still hanging in there to win the game at the end, a less experienced team, I don't think they pull that off. And in fact, in the press conference last night, Max said basically what you had at the end is you had an experienced team playing an inexperienced team for the most part, and that's what happens when you have that. So, but what a great resume building game going into a hostile environment. I got to think, you only have Ethan Happ coming back on that team, but they had a freshman who scored 12 points last night who was hitting some deep shots, who they think is going to be will probably be a starter before the end of the season. And here's the thing, Happ had 8 assists. So here's the problem you have with him is there's very few people, I think, can handle him one-on-one, but you go to double him, then he's going to dish it off to whoever is helping double. And, again, if that guy can hit a shot, then, it's pick your poison. So, again, back to Monday, it's just I want to see the Musketeers just come out and play their game. It's going to be hard again. You're not going to have the emotions you had last night, and there's big chance for the hangover, the letdown. But if they can come out and take care of business like they should against a team like this, that'll show some maturity, and that's what needs to happen on Monday.
And, of course, like you've already said, they head to Las Vegas on Thursday. And, of course, the traveling man, Jimmy LaRique, is going to be there, as he's already mentioned, heading out to the desert. The first game is on Thursday against George Washington. And a program that at one time was on the rise, that's been 20 years ago. They've been sort of middle of the road there in the Atlantic 10. They haven't made a whole lot of noise. But is that a game we've got to watch out for?
Well, again, yeah, it's hopefully, again, it'll be a great game. And, again, now when you go into those tournaments, again, I was at the one in Florida, a lot different atmosphere. There'll be a handful of fans from every school. But I don't think you won't see, obviously there probably won't be very many GW fans. And I think the Xavier Nation, you may have the most fans out there as again, it being a little vacation destiny. Xavier fans usually seem to show up at those. So, again, but it'll be a great, it's a team that was 20-15 last year, so they're no slouch. Middle of the A10, which is a pretty, a conference that usually gets 2 or 3 into the NCAA. So I think it'll be a good game for them. I like these early games against some of these powerhouses rather than, I don't like it when you play just a total cupcake schedule before your conference schedule, and then all of a sudden you're playing tough ball and you kind of get it handed to you or you're not ready for it.
Well, when we get past there, no matter which way it goes, we're going to see either Kansas State or Arizona State. Kansas State had a heck of a run last year, and Arizona State's one of those teams that I think will be on the rise a little bit in the Pac-12. They're not ready to join the Big Four of Arizona, USC, Oregon, and UCLA, but they're going to be in that second tier. So a couple of good schools from good conferences. Of course, we won't know who we're going to play until after our game and their game, but one of those teams is going to be on the slate on Friday.
Yeah, just a couple of observations about each one of them. First of all, Kansas State was in the big dance last year, actually played in the first 4 and then lost to your UC Bearcats in the second round, which was actually the first round for most teams.
And scared Bill Self and Kansas twice with their games. So,
well, and take it a step further, actually beat Baylor twice. And you remember the year Baylor had.
Beat Baylor?
They actually knocked the Baylor what is Baylor?
Bears.
Knocked them off twice. But I agree with you. If I had to bet, I would pick that it's going to be Arizona State. 2 factors, and I actually saw Arizona State 3 times down in Florida last year. One name I'll throw out to you. This is what scares me, Bobby Hurley. We know how he played, and, again, he's been there. I think this is his 3rd season. So I think he's starting to get his kids there to buy into what he wants to do. And I'll throw out a couple names that we need to watch, Trey Holder and Shannon Evans II. And I saw them both last year. They're quality players, and they're leading them in scoring, both of them, I think, around 20 points so far. Of course, the Sun Devils haven't played anybody of much notoriety yet. But if I had to guess, that'll probably be a pretty good game. The first round game there. So whoever the opponent will be a quality opponent, and again, a good experience on the road. And I know I've heard Chris Mack say this before. Actually, I think Thad Matta was the one that started saying this. He likes these 2-game tournaments because they're kind of like the NCAA. You play 2 games within, actually this situation be 2 days. Actually, the NCAA, of course, is 2 games within 3 days. But it's a good experience where you got to play, and then you got to turn around and get ready for an opponent. You really don't know who it is until right before you play them, so you kind of have to. So it's a good experience for them that maybe will pay off down the road in March.
That's great. They are going to Las Vegas, and it's a beautiful trip. It is on Thanksgiving Day, the first game, the day after Thanksgiving. So if you already had your football fill, it would be a great thing to sort of see some of these games. And you hit on something too, Jim. It is early. We focus on this. Like I still use the phrase ranking schmanking, so you don't know what's going to happen really until you get into conference time. But there's always those sleepers, like a Kansas State last year or an Arizona State that's going to make noise. And that brings me to, we'll just talk about it a little bit. We'll talk about it more next week because we'll have a little time before that. But let's hope they don't get caught looking forward to Baylor on the 28th, because that was the team that came up and smacked them down last year, gave them their first loss, and at that time, Baylor wasn't ranked, and it sort of came out of nowhere, and right now they're number 25, so that 76-61 loss, and not only woke the Muskies up, but kind of put them back on the ropes, because they turned right around and lost to Colorado as well. So, we'll talk a little bit about that next week, and of course, we'll also get talking about the big crosstown showdown that comes in with that, with Cincinnati being moved back to December. But any thoughts on that possibility, that instead of focusing on where they are in Vegas, even though it's not like Vegas doesn't have enough distractions, are they going to get caught looking forward?
Well, I hope not, and I think that'll be something that we need to look. But it seems like this team can focus on the here and now. And the good thing about Baylor and Colorado, again, you have the revenge factor, and both of them are coming to Cincinnati. Remember, that was kind of a quick turnaround. Those first two games really on the road, and they were Power 5 opponents. And I think that the Musketeers just kind of almost got worn down with the travel and the turnaround there last year. So it'll be great that they're coming in. But again, you cannot say these Muskies haven't played anybody when it comes to conference time. This schedule's a great schedule, and again, unless you just overschedule, it kind of like, remember Michigan State last year, they kind of overscheduled and kind of got beat down and had some injuries and lost a few there. But in the end, I think it's a great schedule. We hope they can win them all. They might stumble here or there, but again, this is an experienced team. You got 2 4-year seniors, or actually 3 with O'Mara. He's been around playing for 4 years too. This is a team that, again, we don't want to get too excited too early, but could be a special team for him. And I think all these experiences, all these Power 5 teams, and these experiences on the road are going to pay off in the long run.
Yeah, and that's something we mentioned last week, the strength of playing in Wisconsin on the road, going to Vegas for the tournament, because they said they went to Florida next year, they're going to Hawaii next year. It's a tough life being a traveling Musketeer fan there, Jim Reeker. I don't know how you handle it. And Baylor, but we'll just have to see, and we'll talk a little bit more of that next week. Fourth on the agenda here, sort of Big East news. I didn't really go. I say it's early going. It's hard to tell who's there and who's not, but anything happening in the Big East we should be aware of?
Well, tonight there's a big game. You may not think it's a big game, but it is a big game. DePaul plays Illinois. And as of right now in the Gavitt Challenge, there were 8 games scheduled. The Big East holds a 4-3 lead. So if the DePaul Blue Demons can beat Illinois, the Big East will win the Gavitt Challenge, so to speak, between the Big East and the Big Ten. And actually, I didn't even realize this, but my son, who, of course, is a Marquette grad and a Marquette fan, but also follows the Musketeers, but he said that the first 2 years of the Gavitt Challenge, both of them ended in ties. Mm-hmm. So if Illinois does defeat the Blue Demons, it'll be 3 years in a row. But that kind of shows you where the two conferences are. 2 games that I took note of, Seton Hall, who we talked about on our other show, looks like they're going to be formidable. They took it to Indiana. Of course, we've talked about Indiana's kind of had a rough start under Archie Miller here. And I guess doing a little more research in that, I guess Tom Crean kind of left the cupboard bare there after he was let go.
There weren't a lot of canned goods in the cupboard, that's for sure.
The other game that kind of surprised me, I guess, a little bit, but maybe not, just kind of this is where things are going, is Minnesota beating Providence at Providence by about 12 points. And I watched a little bit of that game in the middle of it. I didn't see the end of it. But we thought that Minnesota and Richard Pitino were an up-and-comer, and we talked about Providence being maybe a top 4 team in the Big East. So, if I would have had to bet on that game, the fact that it was at Providence, I probably would have taken Providence, but the Golden Gophers showed me something there. So that's my take on the Big East. Here's the other thing is Villanova and Georgetown didn't even play in this. I'm sure it's because of scheduling. First of all, you had 10 teams in the Big East and 14 in the Big Ten, and then Michigan State didn't play in it either. They're involved in that Champions Classic, so it wasn't a true challenge across the board. But again, it's fun for the fans.
Yeah, and you say it's hard. The ACC and the SEC do that, and there's several of those challenges throughout the year. Some of them spread it out, but yeah, when you have 10 in one and 14 and other people aren't going to play, but it's just nice to go out there. And I'm with you too. I mean, that the Seton Hall team, keep an eye on the Pirates. They made a strong run last year, and even the year before. You remember they won the Big East tournament 2 years ago, and made a strong run last year too, so they might be there. And you said it last week, watch out for Richard Pitino and those Golden Gophers, especially in the Big Ten this year with a new coach at Ohio State, a new coach in Indiana, Wisconsin being down. That it could be their year to make a move, Northwestern as well, even though that, not exactly they were the poor cousins last season. Okay, like I say, next week we'll get a chance to talk about the Crosstown Showdown against the Cincinnati Bearcats, which has been moved back to December after being played about mid-season for the past few years. And right now both teams are in the top 10, so we'll look forward to that on our next cast, which will be sometime next week whenever Jim's finished eating conference popcorn and in between games, and we can schedule that. And, of course, next Thursday when we usually record is Thanksgiving Day, so we want to say, happy Thanksgiving to all of our listeners and all the people on the Ruling Truth that listen to all the podcasts. Any comments that you have about any of that, Jim, before we go on to our trivia and tidbits?
No, but just looking forward to going to Vegas. I haven't been there myself, so I'm excited to visit it. I've heard once is enough, so this might be my once. But again, I always love going out in new venues and watching the Musketeers and hanging out with other Musketeer fans and fans from other schools. Obviously, most of them are connoisseurs of college basketball like myself. That's why they're there in these tournament games. So, it's a lot to look forward to. Yeah.
All right, Stumpy, what do you got for me?
If you think about this will be easy for you, I think.
You always say that.
Okay. So don't get think. Okay. So 2 years ago, we all remember when the Badgers they actually called it an upset because Xavier, I think, was a number 2 seed that year, lost on that last second shot the Musketeers lost to the Badgers. Where was that second round game played? What city?
And you think that if I think about that, suddenly it's going to jump into my head?
You want? Wait. Now, I'll give you a hint.
I mean, they're spread out all over. It's a second round game. There's 16 venues.
I'll give you a hint here. Okay, settle down.
I like it.
I was there. You remember that? I was actually.
You was there. Then my first guess would have to be Indianapolis.
Slow down. I was there. Now, well, that's a good guess, Indianapolis. But yeah. I was there, and I like to go to these games where I have family connections.
Well, then that was probably either St. Louis or...
Ding, ding.
Okay, yeah.
But
as those you don't know, Jim, he mentioned his oldest son who went to Marquette, but his younger son graduated last year from St. Louis. And of course, if you see Jim around town, he wears about 6 different colleges on his sleeve. Right now, one of his sons is the younger son is in the graduate program at Notre Dame. So he's gonna have torn loyalties this year. He's not going to know where to turn.
I got all kinds of. Somebody's usually winning.
Yeah. Well, out of those schools, yeah, Marquette and SLU and Xavier and up there, and of course I know it was great to be able to have your son there in Madison to share that time with the Muskies with you.
He actually had a Xavier shirt on last night. Even though he's a Marquette grad.
Well, they wear blue too. So
yeah, but it was a true Xavier shirt, and of course, again, it made it go from 39 to 40 people who had Musketeer blue on in the whole place last night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So. Well, a couple things that are just tidbits about that, and I don't know if you know this or not, but that was, yes, one of the few times that Xavier has lost to a lower seed in the past 32 years. Since they started going to the NCAA regularly, they've had 25 appearances in those 32 years since 1986. They've only lost to a lower seed 5 times. And Wisconsin was one of the last second shot. The others were, your boys Marquette in 2011, Maryland in 2003, Washington in 98, and then to Texas in 1990. And do you happen to know? Let's go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Didn't they lose to Oklahoma one year when I think Xavier was a 3 seed and Oklahoma was a 6?
They did lose, but Oklahoma, that game, from what I saw in my research, Xavier was not the lower seeded team. So I don't know if it was a 2 and a 3 or whatever it was. Do you know, I mean, they've lost in the tournament twice, sent out of the tournament twice in that time by 4 different teams, and this wouldn't be surprising, but it's the team that took them out last year, Gonzaga, has done it twice. Notre Dame's knocked them out twice. UCLA's knocked them out twice, and Duke's knocked them out twice. So it's it's not like they're losing to the Little Sisters of the Poor or Fred's Barber College. They're running into some teams. Let me see. I'll throw a little trivia at you, and this won't be hard if you think. In that time. Yeah, throw it back at you. In that time, Xavier has played 52 games in the NCAA. What's their record in the tournament?
52 games. What's their record? Mm-hmm. I don't know. Let's say 25 and 27.
Yeah, you're close. I mean, think of that, 25 appearances, they've never won, so you got to have at least 25 losses. But they're 26 and 26 in that time, exactly 500. So that's pretty incredible. And people think, that's only 500, but like
you're always going to lose probably.
Everybody, the only person that doesn't lose is the national champion, and to have played 52 games. I say you could be 0 and 25 in 25 appearances, losing in the first round. That means they've gone deep several times, and that is the history of Muskie basketball. Well, it has been fun, as always, talking to my good friend Jim Reeker and sharing a little bit of Muskie basketball. We will be back, as we always are, on Tuesday. Well, Tuesday for our Trogcast, the 2 really old guys talking NCAA basketball. We'll work out a time for that. Look at that at the Grueling Truth website, as you always do. And we'll get posted sometime toward the end of the week with the holiday and Jim's travels out to see the Muskies. And, of course, those 2 games we might post a little bit later. But we'll look forward to your next Razorcast sometime next weekend. We thank you all for listening. And until that time, we'll say,
Go Muskies. All right, good job. Hello? Hello?
I'm still here, Jim. I did it again. Hung up instead of.
I thought that's what you did.
But it's not jumping off either. What am I doing wrong here? Star 9.